Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. To Big Blend Radio, everyone. It is the end of 2024, and we didn't want to close out the year without bringing acclaimed author Leonce Gaiter on the show. He's going to talk about his latest book that came out this summer called A Memory of Fictions, or just Tiddy-Boom. I love that title. You can go to his website, leoncegaiter.com, and that's LeonceGaiter.com, just to prove I can spell, but it's linked in the episode notes. So, Leonce, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am fine, and thank you so much for having me.
You know what? I love that you're on the show, closing out the year with a good book and one with really good character development. It's like, when I don't know, we watch, like British comedy because the characters are everything, right?
Uh,
And that's the same thing with your writing. It's like, oh my gosh, you're right in it. Have you ever written for screen or for plays?
yeah, my goal was to be a screenwriter, to be a filmmaker. Um, but I'm old, and from a from a different generation of film. I was raised on 70s films and classic Hollywood films, and
Mm.
it soon became clear post Star Wars that this was a completely different world. This was not the world of Wim
Mm.
Wenders and Paul Mazursky and the filmmakers that I grew up idolizing, right?
Wow.
So I had always written, and part of the reason I turned to film was because I was insecure in my writing. I simply didn't think I was
Oh,
good enough.
no. Oh, no, don't tell me that because
I,
I'm
I,
I'm like you turn to page one and you're in it. You're in
but
like
but
Flynn.
but I think what happened is that I was so screwed up as a
Mhm.
younger person that I think the nakedness of writing, the directness of it, the lack of filter between you and the page was overwhelming to me. I think that scared me, right? I think I had to get older and a lot wiser
Oh, wow.
and comfortable in my skin to be able to do that, right?
Yeah, because I would say you just go right there, you know.
Yeah, I
And then but I love that because if you can't beat around the bush in what you're portraying, you can't because it won't come off. It's not, there's no integrity to it
well,
if you
what
don't.
a lot of people though take are off put by that. By that, there's a
Oh.
certain intensity in my writing,
Hmm.
and there's a certain intensity in it, and there's a certain almost surreal quality. I've attended. My parents are from New Orleans. I have that Grand Guignol, over the top Faulkner-esque kind of sensibility, and
Hmm.
I don't do kitchen sink. It's not your neighbor next door. The things I portray are generally larger than life. And
Hmm.
frankly, that's not very in vogue right now. Right now, we seem to be very much in a kind of kitchen sink mode where average lives and normal things and, you know, um, items you recognize, brand items you recognize, that sort of thing. It's sort of like witnessing your own life, whereas my
Yeah.
books are witnessing lives very often you hope you never leave.
But they're real. It's
Yeah,
reality, right?
yeah,
And very bold because the character's bold. There's
yeah,
no, you know, but you're writing, and I love it because all the write up about the book and is that is jazzy, and I went immediately it is because jazz will lead you down and then all of a sudden it'll just like bam, and that's the titty boom. And I was wondering about people understanding what the titty boom is.
the end of the book tells you what the titty boom is, and I'm not going to tell you.
All right, well, but
Very,
it's but okay, I'm not gonna but all right.
but it does have to do with titty boom is something that musicians will say.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a
Yeah,
drum
it's a
type of sound
it's
that you
the
make.
it's yeah, there's bada bing and then there's uh-oh.
Yeah, yeah, and the book takes a look at life that sort of compares it to that. And I am a jazz fiend. I listen to jazz constantly, all day, every day. And
Mm.
um, what astonishes me about the music is its variance in the fact that it can go from cripplingly sad to buoyant in a bar, you know, in a heartbeat. We tend right now, also something that's very much in vogue is to have books or songs or movies that have a rather flat countenance. It's a sort of a staid emotional tone throughout. And my work has been criticized in the past by not having a consistent emotional tone
Oh, did you
throughout.
mean that you didn't use a template?
Yeah, that.
Well, isn't that kind of where we're going, right?
Yes, it is very
And
much.
that's also it's been going on in the music world for sure,
Oh yeah.
unless you're independent.
Hmm. And
And
that's
actually, anything, and it's like we have to fight to be our own
right.
selves, and I think it goes with the story of your book, of your main character there.
Yeah, and here the main character is, and what's also interesting is that it also the fact that I write very often about Black characters in principally white worlds because I'm a Black
Yeah,
character in a principally white country.
right.
Um, and what's odd is that I think the publishing industry and readers are very accustomed to books about Black people who are reacting to the white world around them as opposed to acting on it,
Mm,
right? My characters act on the world. The they take upon themselves the power to change the world around them, right? As opposed to re changing themselves to adapt to the world around them.
mm,
I think it's very rare to have Black people in books who have the audacity to believe in their souls that they have the power to alter everything around them, right? And the megalomania to try,
mm-hmm,
right? Um, Now, some of my characters in other books take that megalomania to an outrageous extreme. This book, it's more about a real character in real life, but that comes through as well. This person insists on living his own his own life in his own way, regardless of what anybody, be it parent, be it society, be it um, friends, whatever, no matter what anybody else says. And there's a price to pay for that,
mm-hmm,
right? But it is willingly paid. Um, and I think that's just very different. And also, I talk about the book as a modern day Bildungsroman, and that
mm-hmm,
is a German word for books that talk about the social and intellectual coming of age of an individual. And that's what you're seeing here. Um, this book is about very much how he grows and
mm-hmm.
changes and thinks, right?
It's a coming of age, but it's also like an interesting thing to be reading now. Our world is very interesting right now.
Mm.
Um, it's yeah, we could go in that's a whole
Oh
other
yeah,
show too.
may you live
You
in
know,
interesting times. Yeah.
yeah, that's putting it politely, right?
Uh-huh.
But it there's something to be said about being who you are
Hmm.
and doing what you want to do, right? And that's for anyone. And at the same time, we're in this world where people are boxing themselves in. So this for any race reading this, right?
Uh-huh.
Any gender, it really is about being authentic in integrity to self. And that's why art is so important. The arts.
Yeah, and and there's a lot of talk about living your truth and being yourself, and as if it's all
Yeah.
lollipops and roses and tripping
Oh,
down the.
it's not. Oh,
It's
hell
not.
no.
Um, you know, it's
No.
people adapt and people succumb and people conform because it's the shortest distance between 2 points. It's the least friction, right?
Mm,
So if you choose to go a different way, there will be friction, right?
hmm
And that friction can either make or break you, sometimes in between, right?
hmm
Sometimes one at one point and the other at another point. But I sincerely believe that whatever you go through to do that is worth it, right? And I bristle when people suggest there's not a price to be paid for doing it because there is.
Oh, yes, there is. I mean,
Uh,
I mean, mm. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I'm just going as an individual in anything. I think art, that's why, we always talk about what about the starving artist? Well, the artist chose to do their art the way they wanted, not what
Mhm.
they were told to do. If you're commissioned to write a book, I think you would have a very difficult time. Would you? If
Yeah,
someone said, I
well,
want you to write it this way and keep it exactly this way and stick to the
I,
formula.
that would be extremely difficult. And I have tried. I will tell you that I have written a couple of books with the idea of selling out completely. The idea
Yeah,
is I'm going to follow the formula and I am going to write something that nobody will be able to deny is just like everything everybody else writes that hits the bestseller list. And of course, it turned out perverse and weird. And nobody.
it
And
and it saps your soul.
yeah, well, I was so poor at it that it didn't, simply because it
Yeah.
became what it became. It became part of me, and it took me many, many years to not take umbrage when people told me I was weird, right? But I have finally come to grips with that. Yes, I'm not normal.
That's
So,
okay. Well, you're not supposed to be. If you're in the arts, you're the weird. Oh, I remember once we were at a business meeting. Um, Obviously we saw advertising and things like this, and the guy goes, "Let me talk to the person with the brains. The creatives are always weird." And I'm like, and it's the two of us, and we're
uh,
both the business brains and the creatives behind this, and
yeah,
we're looking at them going, "If you don't have the creativity, you ain't got. Mm-mm.
right. Uh,
You
it's
don't. There
it's
is nothing without creativity."
what's interesting also is I think there's like
And
we
he didn't
talk
put
about
it politely, by the way. It
right.
was
I
it
can
was not
imagine.
it was not it wasn't nice. It was
I can imagine. I think it's really interesting right now that some of the biggest genres are fantasy and science fiction, right? And I think, in particular, for men who read fiction,
hmm,
I think
okay.
science fiction is huge for men
Hmm,
who read fiction. And what I think though is that in the past, books that were not fantasy or science fiction satisfied that lust for other worlds, for seeing things that were different and wild and outside yourself, and just you may be talking about the world, but you're presenting it as a new world, right?
mhm.
Um, and I think that's something that is rare these days. And I think that's something, me being a throwback, I think that's something I touch on in that I write about, yeah, it's the world out there. It's not science fiction, but it takes that world and casts it through a lens that makes it something different.
Mhm.
And when I talked about film and studying film, old black and white films, right? Part of the point of black and white was abstraction,
Mhm.
right? That everything was abstract. It may be the world, that may be a car, that may be a building, that may be a road, but everything is different because color has been sapped from it and you're watching an abstraction of the world,
Hmm.
right? Then
Yeah.
the first color movies were Technicolor, these outrageously bright, vivid colors that you'd never see in
Psychedelic,
the world.
man. Come on.
Psychedelic, right.
They were.
Again, very abstracted. But when people started doing more cinema verite, more, again, kitchen sink, lifelike material, the colors became normal colors. The lighting became normal lighting. And
Not like mine. Green.
not like you. And I think that that sort of tells the story there. I believe in that abstraction. I believe
Mhm.
in that.
That's the magic.
I think that's the magic.
That's
Yeah,
the
I do.
magic. Okay, because if it's so purist when it's templated, right? Does that make sense? So this is like if you go and listen to a vinyl record and it has a scratch,
Mhm.
it's part of that. It's part of that. Everything has become so crisp and clear and perfect, and stick to the template, stick to the formula, only use these colors, only do that. And eventually it's like, okay, let's all wear a uniform again. Like,
Yeah,
what's the
uh,
difference? You
it's
know,
I a previous novel of mine is called "I Dreamt I Was in Heaven," and it takes
right.
a an historical fact that very few know about, in which five very young, perhaps teenage, Black and Native American kids in 1895 went on a 5-day war against the United States to take back Indian lands, what
Mm.
is currently Oklahoma, Indian territory, right?
Yes.
Now imagine that. It's 1895, dawn of the new century, and these five essentially children wage war against the United States. Now, when I talk about taking the power to change the world and the megalomania it would require, that's that's what that is. But, this was a book that everybody who read it, and it was sent through a reputable New York agent to a gazillion publishers. Oh, they said, I find it very interesting. I couldn't put it down. It was, but I don't think there's an audience for it, right? There was always the but I don't think. In other words, it hadn't sold before.
It
It
hasn't been
did
made into a movie first to
it
sell it.
and it didn't present. The other thing I think that's fascinating in all of the kitchen sink material is that it has a tendency to confirm our priors about ourselves and the world we live in. It tells us that we're right. It tells us that there's no need to question. It has a tendency to do that. Um, and it tells us that we are just and fair and good. Sometimes we are, a great deal of the time we are not,
Mm.
right? Because we're humans,
Yep.
right? And I think I also write books that do not tell you what you may want to hear about the world you live in or your place in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But things that my experience of life has told me are true,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think those are things we have to face. And I think our current sort of algorithmic environment allows us to simply spoon feed ourselves the same material over and over again that tells us we're wonderful, right?
Yes.
Um, and you know, I think it's incredibly important to look at the aspects of ourselves that are not wonderful.
Dirty, because the good stuff comes out of the dirt, right? So I think so. And I'm not being self-helpy woo-woo at all. Um, you've traveled all over and raised that way as an army brat, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um, us too, like we not as military,
Right.
but as my mom is an artist and lived in Africa, Kenya, England, South Africa, in Mexico, you name it, on the
Hmm.
road. So our we watch wildlife. We're animal people,
Hmm.
and we watch people. And it's if you don't see the crap that we do as humans and really showcase, it's not real. I mean, it's like we went through, and I think what's interesting too, we went through the silent generation, right?
Hmm.
And look now, everyone's into family history. It's one of the top hobbies in the world is
Hmm.
researching family history. And as people do it, they're finding all kinds of stuff they did not want to know about.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
our family, I'm like, oh, I don't say this on a show.
Hmm.
No, I mean it. And it's like, whoa, and is that going to be me? No, because I am me, and it's my choice who I want to be and what I like and what I want to do. And watching people, I wanted to ask you about that through traveling, because travel is never there is no template. You can try and have a template, but
Right.
it doesn't work. It is nothing but detours, and you're gonna have a temper tantrum when things don't go wrong, go right, and then that's interesting. Good luck with that. Uh,
Uh-huh.
so has travel taught you about people
I mean, it
going
has.
through things? Yeah.
I think my familial background, because I did have a volatile household, I think that
Mm.
teaches you to,
Oh yeah.
it encourages your peripheral vision, right? You have a tendency to see people and things in sharp relief. You learn to um, heed your inner voice. When your inner voice says beware, you beware.
Oh yes.
When it says don't trust, you don't trust. The other thing about traveling for us is that I was growing up a military family, a black military family, And again, we were placed in all of these white surroundings, right? So that was something else that taught me to watch, right? And I had to be very careful who I associated with, who I befriended, who I trusted, right? Because this was not a time where being a Black person in those circumstances automatically meant, or it never does, automatically meant acceptance, right?
No, they're
It
watching
could
for you to
mean
fall.
violence.
They're
Yes.
watching, they're waiting for it,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that and the book is about, it's a striving Black middle class family. She's a school teacher, he's a military officer, and they are placed in these white worlds, and they think of themselves as exemplars of the Black community. So the whole presentation has to be perfect. The children have to be perfect. You have to get straight A's. You must be perfectly dressed. You know, um, I was not essentially allowed to play outside. I was not allowed to run around barefoot and dirty without a shirt on,
Mm.
right? Because that would reflect negatively, right? So I was, in a lot of ways, I was not allowed to be a kid, right? And that was all in order to satisfy the eyes that were looking in on you, right? And I think that's what taught me to look out, right? To look back at those people whose
Mm.
gaze I was supposed to be so fearful of,
Mm.
right? And to demystify that
Mm.
gaze, right? And actually make my own gaze primary to it, and thus write about it, right?
Writing does a lot, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
everything.
So yeah, it's um, the whole thing of point of view is like critical to me in writing, in that um, some of my books take me a long time to write, years and
Mm.
years, and not because it's a soul searching project process and all of that. It's simply a matter of getting it right. How do I write this story that has these painful aspects, perhaps, or these shocking aspects, and how do I make that entertaining to an audience? I
Mm.
write, I don't believe by any stretch. The other thing about jazz, I am wandering all over the place, aren't I? The other thing about
That's
jazz,
jazz.
the other thing about jazz, though, is that these people have a head, they have an opening statement, right? And then they solo, and they
Hmm.
have to keep your interest as they improvise, right?
Jam. And they're
And
jamming half of the
everybody's
time.
improvising, right? It's
Yep.
not just the saxophone playing over a steady beat that the drummer is listening to the saxophone player who's listening to the pianist,
Hmm.
etc., and all are adapting to one another. And the wonderful thing about it, though, is that these people made a living in clubs. They couldn't bore anybody, right? That was not allowed. You'd get booed off that stage,
Yep.
right?
Or beer
So,
bottled.
right. So they had to entertain. And, I think of Duke Ellington as the prince of that. The man was making some of the highest art
Mm.
that could be made
One of
in
my
music.
favorite top 10 musicians of all time is Duke Ellington.
And
Mm.
entertaining massively the entire time. If anybody wants introduction to Duke Ellington, go get an album called Such Sweet Thunder.
Mm.
It's one of the great compositions of the 20th century period. So there,
That's it. No,
that's
it's
it.
true.
But so, I feel the same way. The goal is to entertain. And the question is, how do I bend these characters and their world together in such a way that you're with them as they struggle, as they suffer,
Hmm.
as they experience joy, whatever, right? In the extraordinary circumstances I place them in. So it's,
That's life.
yeah, but how do you make it entertaining? That's
Yeah, yeah.
the again, the whole I suffered from my art, now it's your turn. No, that doesn't work for me in any medium. I
Hmm.
expect to be entertained, and the hope for everything I write is to entertain, right?
No, it's
And
good. You move,
and
you're so fast moving in that you, yet at the same time there's texture to what you write. And that's a very interesting thing because you get into it and there's texture and it moves, it's moving like
mhm,
music does, right? So
yeah,
that's dynamics. You have dynamics. And jazz, that's a really that interesting line of jazz, especially people, they'll get together and it's a jam, improvise, but you still have to go back to the audience, like you're saying. You can't go off in your own bubble for too long. You have to come back to earth. And
Uh-huh.
that's each one is like in your characters, and each one is compartmentalized in a way. Like, here's this character doing this over here. It's like
Uh-huh.
cooking. How do you, it is like cooking, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Go to gumbo
I'm a
land
lousy
to,
cook, but I
but
do
you
know
can write.
cooks.
But you can write. If you, it doesn't matter, you can write, so you're allowed to not cook. But that
Um,
is, music is the dynamics where you have to know just it's timing. Timing is everything.
and that is absolutely right. And especially when you are making these dynamic shifts or emotional shifts in the narrative from, you know, like one book literally goes from things that are just horrifying to things that are, if you saw them, they'd be funny, right? And that is just entirely timing, right? It is a matter of feel. When I work on a book, it's like crawling on the ground with a blindfold, and of course you have a plan, but that plan often gets thrown out the
Mm.
window when the reality of your characters becomes palpable, right?
Do they
So
talk to you?
no, I, I hope not.
Like you wake up in the morning, like, go write this
Ah!
down now.
No, institutionalize me. They don't talk to me. I talk to them, I think more than anything else. I talk them out. As they change as they form. My best laid plans are always shot to hell, you know, one third of the way through. The characters generally start doing something else.
Oh, that
Right.
sounds like a band. That's
Just
exactly what happens on stage. Somebody goes and does a solo completely at the part they're not supposed to and says, "Oh yeah, watch this. You were too loud on
uh-huh.
this. I'm going to take you out on this." Yeah,
Yeah. So and sometimes it's a weird input. I was writing when I was writing I Dreamt I Was in Heaven, that my agent at the time had said, because I was having false starts, it was not working. And he said something like, you know, the heavens ought to open up and something should fall out of them or something. You got to get things going here. And literally, that strange, vague statement opened up the way for me to
that's
progress through
wild.
the book, right? It was just some odd statement from somebody, and so you never know, what's going to push you forward. And this book, A Memory of Fictions, it's a kaleidoscopic novel that goes back and forth through
Hmm.
time, and just putting that together, it's a jigsaw puzzle, right?
Yeah.
And just putting it together so that it made sense and such that you didn't lose your place, such that you knew. And even when things were juxtaposed that were not contiguous, the emotional flow of them was such that you could just go with it,
Mm.
right? That was what was difficult here. Um, and that's what took a great long time to get
So
right.
when you write, two things, like when you get the flow, you've got everything going. Do you ever draw stuff out, like physically scribble, doodle, kind of this kind of
No,
stuff? Okay, now
no.
do you write because of the character? Like I said about the texture,
Mhm.
and obviously you love music. So, like when you're listening to notes and when it goes down and dark in the piano,
Uh-huh.
and then all of a sudden a
Uh-huh.
little bit of like a little light, you know, plink plink happens, right?
Mhm.
The opposite of the Tiddy-Boom happens, right?
Yeah.
Plink plink, yet that dark is still there, and then you just go, let me just add that little in there,
Yes, and there is. You'll read and you'll go, something's missing here,
and
right?
then blink, do you
Yes,
hear
and
it?
yes, you do hear it
Mm.
and you feel it. And something's missing here, so you have to fill that space or fix that transition. Or it's funny, when I was working on I Dreamt I Was in Heaven, I was listening to bar talk for children. They were pieces he wrote to help young piano players learn. And
Okay.
he introduced complex aspects like dissonance, but they're generally playful, they're generally simpler melodies. right? And basically having these nursery rhymes in the background while I'm describing these people going to war, right, was a great catalyst for the writing.
That's wild, though. That's kind of like, it's kind of sarcastic in a weird way. Not sarcastic, but surrealism.
Yeah,
It's
and it is surreal. I think there's an aura of the surreal about what I do, right? And I think that's what, you know, the mainstream
that's the
publishing
texture.
certainly doesn't like it, but I think that's what they don't like,
Well, how
right?
many books do you have now?
4, 5,
Okay. Well, then I
yeah.
think you're doing okay.
Um, um, but it's, the I again, I don't. hmm, I believe life is big. The world is big. The universe is unimaginably large, right? And I don't have a vault. I don't have I don't have an enormous sense of the grandiosity of human beings. I believe
Mm.
we are animals. I believe that we have
We've got some
convinced
steps to go
ourselves
first.
we have convinced ourselves we're not,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's our tragedy, right?
Oh, you're speaking our language now, really. Yeah.
I do think that's our tragedy, and frankly, I think it will be the destruction of us in time. Dinosaurs didn't, made it longer than we have so far, so let's see how far we get.
It's interesting too, because when you think about, we're so big yet so small, and then we were talking earlier about fear.
Mhm,
And that's when here comes the almighty ego. And that's when the ego wants conformed little boxes on the hillside.
mhm. Yeah.
that
I
that confirmation. And how can art, and I say art, music, books, all of it, art is the opposite of conforming.
and it's odd. Hmm,
But
I
there's
don't,
lessons to be learned, though, right? See, there's
I,
lessons,
I don't,
structure.
I don't think much of art. I think that's not what I meant to say. I don't think a lot about art,
Mm,
right? I consume it,
yeah.
but, and it makes me think, but about it as a thing, art as a thing, it doesn't really concern me.
Mm,
Individuals' utilization of it does,
mm,
right? The fact that what Joni Mitchell can do with a lyric and notes is, you know,
amazing.
beyond
Amazing.
belief. What Stan Getz can sound like on a
Mhm.
saxophone, the harmonic genius of Lee Konitz, these are things that, yeah, the sheer listening to Leontine Price sing, um, a particular aria, the things Aretha Franklin could do with the song. These are extraordinary artists
Mhm.
that reach a level that you call profundity,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's something that we missed seeking. I miss people seeking that, right? And profundity is not profundity. How do you describe profundity? It is,
It's big. It's larger than life.
it's larger than life, and it's forcing you to
Mhm.
confront yourself as a human being in a world that's on a planet that's in a universe that forces you to look
Mhm.
at yourself as something with a construct that's unimaginably large and in which you may well be outrageously insignificant.
That's, it's interesting about this, because when you think about, like, you read a really good book and you're
Mhm.
a writer, then you want to go, okay, that's it. I'm out. This is right. And
Yeah.
that's a part of it. And as a musician too, there's, like, a singer, and on the blues side of things. And I'll go see, and I'm like, uh, it's not happening. But
Yeah.
it's bogus, because suddenly you're so awed, right? It's awe,
Uh-huh.
that amazing, that honest, right? And to me, like, there is still a lot of that art, but it's living in the world of independence. Okay,
Yeah.
independent publishing, independent musicians, it's all about independence and not being owned by these big conglomerates. And that is who's pushing the template and the uniform and the you must do this and you must look like that and you must act this way and you must promote these products this way. Don't promote the
Yeah.
products your way. And
Right.
if you're going to be an influencer, you're going to still lie about the template. It's a
Uh,
template, you know, it's all a template. It's everyone's
uh,
reading the same coaching book, and I'm tired of it. but it's
yeah.
but that's on the that's on the big mainstream side. But if everybody keeps swimming in the mainstream, they're eating the same food that is terrible for us because we're all eating the same mass produced food. Now, if we go off the side of the mass produced food, we're going to have really good food or really bad. It can be really bad too
Right.
if I'm
Yeah.
cooking or you're cooking, right? But if somebody else is cooking that I know it's going to be good. But we've done it in agriculture, we've done it, and human beings have done this for years. But if you go off the beaten path into the independent world, you're going to find the writers, the
Mhm.
musicians, all of those that blow your mind. Not saying that some of the people that are big and great aren't great, because they're still there and their memories live on.
Uh,
We're kind of in the memory zone now, right? Um, but I have to say, just there's a lot of good writing and a lot of good music, but it just isn't what we see at halftime in a football game, which I don't know anything about.
yeah, it's I I couldn't agree more. I'm old enough that when I was younger, I was exposed to the beginnings of rock and roll. I lived through the, the heyday of the development of the form, um, and up until the present day. So when I hear most things, I've heard it before, right? I've simply heard it before,
Okay,
and
what
very
about
often
R&B? How do you feel now about R&B? What
I
hasn't that changed?
yeah, there there were certain circumstances that allowed singers like Aretha Franklin or Ann Peebles or Lorraine Ellison to exist, right? To thrive, and those circumstances aren't there anymore. It's
Mm,
it's and again, I'm sure there are people out there who are excellent, but I I got to tell you that I'm no longer hunting them
mm,
as I probably should. You know,
mm,
I have kind of um, so much of what somebody tells me this is wonderful, that's wonderful, and I listen to it and it's, oh well, I've heard that before. You know, I'm I'm almost worn
mm,
down by it.
mm,
I don't see very many movies because I've seen them before, right?
mhm.
Um,
Oh, you're like, go to the movie theater, we'll all sit there and start saying exactly what's going to happen
and
to the exact word, right?
yeah, and of course, right now you're largely looking at intellectual property, so there is a formula. You if you're doing another X-Men
Oh,
movie, it's gonna
oh
be
yeah, have
similar to the other
a
X-Men.
sequel. We have,
It's
yeah.
so, all that's gonna happen, and some of that stuff can be entertaining, and that's great, and people can love it, and that's great. But it really, I mean, it's just not it's not something I personally
Mm,
take joy in most of the time, you know.
mm, mm.
So, and the other thing to remember is that this stuff's hard. It's not easy to make a good movie. It's
It's
not
not easy to
easy to
write a
make a
good book. Are
good
you
book.
kidding me?
It's not easy to.
Look, how many years? How many years again? Because it's like every word is, it's blood, sweat, and tears as a book.
And especially it's not easy, and expecting people to do it, you know, on demand every year is, excessive. It's not going to happen, right? So yeah, it's hard. I don't know where we are. I don't know how much of my feelings are just curmudgeonly, or how much is valid in that
Mm,
I am seeing a formularization of most things, and I am hearing that in most music.
Mm,
And I'm seeing it in a lot of the big books that are out there
mhm.
that are hyped to the moon, and I'll buy a copy and go, why? Right?
That's
Um, so, I
this
do
this
I
is
do my
good.
best to
Yeah,
keep an open mind, but
yeah. It no, but you're not the only one who talks about this either. So
yeah.
it's a, someone. It's like giving a connoisseur of tea, tea leaves off a floor from a factory, right? Instead of tea from Nepal, from the actual leaves, not
Uh,
the dust.
yeah.
So that's the work. I think
But
it's
but
so important to talk about the pureness of art, whether and I when I say art, I mean books, music, all of that, paintings,
uh-huh.
dance. It's about, you know, pure art sometimes is going to totally piss you off, and that's a good thing. It can make you cry, and that's a
Uh-huh.
good thing. It
Mhm.
can make you smile, it can make you laugh. That's all good things because it's supposed to move you, make you think, have some kind of feeling. And if an artist, a writer, a poet, whatever, has made you feel something,
Mhm.
stirred you out of your day to day, or your continued, it snapped you out of, it's a snap out of reality, snap out of the same thing you're in, then the artist has done their job. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, and again, for my mind, I've done my job if I have entertained you. I've done my job, whether or not it makes you think, you know, like, um, it, I hope I'm writing something um, that impresses itself upon one, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not out there giving life lessons. I'm not trying to,
Mm-mm.
people will go, what's the more lesson of your book? I'm not a teacher. I don't have a lesson. I'm not
It's
trying
like
to
scenes. It's
tell you
scenes
how to
from
live.
like scenes from a restaurant kind of thing.
Mhm.
It's something. It sits with you like a movie,
And I
and
think
that's
that's the film training. Every book I do sort of does that. While my books would be, a lot of the books would be almost impossible to turn into movies. They're very cinematic.
yeah.
Right.
But
But
I like that.
I think when people say cinematic, they mean larger than life. They mean
Hmm.
the big screen, not the little
Hmm.
screen,
They're very visual. They're very
Yeah.
visual when you read them,
Mhm.
and I think that's why you absorb it. You feel like you're right in it immediately,
And
and
what's really important about
that's a
me,
beautiful thing.
they're very
Yeah.
visual, but I don't describe things. I'm
But you're giving, that's the co-creative experience of
Yeah,
a reader,
uh,
right?
I give you permission and I give you the outline you need to imagine it as you would. The main character in A Memory of Fictions is never described to you, you know, not really.
You just already got it. You just
You
have that.
just
It's
right.
the texture.
What you
You
see is
are a
going to be different
surrealist.
from what
You're a
Yes,
surrealist. You
I
are.
do. I
Yeah.
I am.
Dabbling in impressionism.
And that's very unusual these days. And it wasn't in the past. One of my earliest influences was Faulkner, right? Who
Okay.
just
Oh, yeah.
nobody likes. But at the
That's
same
okay.
And then I loved Robertson Davies, right? Who also is a surrealist at the same time. I loved Pynchon, who's a surrealist in his own way. I uh, to my mind, Ellison is a surrealist. Toni Morrison was a surreal. I mean,
Do you
all the
think
books.
writing history has more? There's a I don't know. It's not romanticism, but it is more surrealist. I've always been drawn to historical fiction because historical fiction was really about real stuff. It always seemed to be about really real stuff that people were going through, right? Whereas modern times, it's kind of wah, wah, wah. When you,
Well, I think in
does
historical
that make
fiction,
sense?
yes, it does. I think in historical fiction, it's easier for you as a writer to my worlds are constructed from the characters. It's as if the characters literally emanate the world around them like an aura, right? Um, and it's easier to do that in historical fiction in that it's the past. Nobody has a direct corollary. They can't walk outside and see it. right? This was 1895. You can't walk outside and see, oh, that was 1895. 1895 is a function of the imagination. Therefore, it's easy to make it a function of your character's imagination, right?
Okay, gotcha.
And I think it's easy for that to become more immersive, right? Whereas I think when you're writing in a modern day context, the world around you is almost a distraction from the world the character should be inhabiting. I'm trying to think if I have ever, I have
You're gonna
never,
write about people's Facebook posts.
I have never written, I've never written a book that isn't historical. It may only be set in 1980, but I've never written a book that is not historical.
I need to read your other one now too, because that history is so fascinating. Because in Oklahoma, there's a Civil War battlefield where Indians and African Americans fought together against the North with the South.
Well, what's fascinating is that
What's going on?
Indian territory in 1895 had more whites than Indians in it, but it also had communities of Black freedmen, right? So it was truly a multiracial community of natives, whites, and Blacks, right?
Yep.
And natives, whites, and Blacks together joined to rebuff the Rufus Buck gang and capture them when they declared this war. The Buck gang thought they were going to have natives and Blacks rise up with them, right, to usurp the lands, when in fact, whites, natives, and Blacks joined together to put them down. I mean, they were nuts.
Man.
What they did was outrageous and insane, but it was a fascinating period, and I think people know very little about that. And this was just before the Indian territory was broken up and sold, basically auctioned off to white settlers.
I'm gonna have this fascinating history. We're doing a lot in that area, so I'm gonna have to. I have to read it now. This is so much fun talking to you. Yeah, I want to paint now for some reason. I want to finish. I want to finish the book, but I'm so glad to. It is really being true to your craft, and true to the story, true to the characters. There's something about that that's really important, I think, in writing and in movies, stage plays. If your character can be the worst villain, the biggest idiot, horrible individual, could be Hitler, but if the character doesn't portray the Hitler properly, it's out. You've lost complete integrity, complete steam, and it sucks. Hitler didn't go with a template, right? So you can't do that to a character. I don't care how beautiful, how horrible, I don't care what the character is as a character. You have to be pure with the character, even if the character is not pure.
And I think people very often think that if you write a character, you are praising a character. If you write somebody who, does horrible things, you are suggesting that those horrible things are not horrible. No, that's not the way it works. Character, to my mind, character is everything. Like I said, the world around the character emanates from the character, right? Everything in that book needs to be working together, again, in a cinematic fashion, wherein the surroundings tell you about the character, the lighting tells you about the character, the music, the wigs, the costumes, everything has to be functioning toward building, supporting, and pushing that character toward whatever that character's inevitable end is, right? It's, I have plots in some of my books, but I'm not a plot guy. I'm a character guy.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is, whether I'd want to change it, I don't know. But if I could write a James Patterson novel, I'd write a James Patterson novel. Trust me, my mortgage would thank me. But
no, but I get it. But it's really wonderful when you can read and get involved in a character immediately. And it's like, oh, everybody stop everything. I need to just go and hang out with this book. And that's what keeps people reading and engaged, because you're not telling the reader what to read. It's like
Oh,
going to a restaurant and a chef
uh-huh,
telling you how to eat the meal that they just prepared.
uh-huh.
I understand it could be fancy and there's something different, but actually, don't tell me how to eat.
Well, there's another thing too, because very often, uh, again, I mentioned that there are certain expectations of Black characters in fiction, right?
Sure.
And I think those expectations come from both Black and white audiences. Black
Hmm.
audiences tend to want heroes,
Yep.
white audiences want whatever. But I think when you have characters who um, who are anti-heroes, right? Who are not all good, not all bad, who may have good intentions but do horrible things to to try to fulfill those intentions, who, as in the Rufus Buck gang, thirst for vengeance. I mean, there are entire areas of human experience that Black writers, I think, have been barred, colloquially, from exploring. The idea of rage, right? Yeah, let's put it this way. Let's put it this way. If you were enslaved for a couple of 100 years and then suffer apartheid for a couple of 100 years and then just plain old racism subsequently, would you be angry? If
Oh,
someone
sure.
had denied you access to an education, to a job you were qualified for, to economic opportunity, what would white people do
Yep.
had
Hmm.
they been so treated, right?
Yep.
Come on. Half the white population um, is furious because white supremacy is no longer sufficiently strong, right? It's still there, it's just not
It's there.
strong enough. So they're ready to rage and blow everything up because of that.
Hmm.
But Black people cannot be angry, right?
Now, do you think in literature, if a Black person is writing about an enraged Black person,
Mhm.
then do Black readers get mad at that?
Well, I think Black Americans have been taught that there's always been the stereotype of the
Always be
violent
good.
Black
Don't
person.
wear your
Uh,
shoes outside, right? Back
right,
to that.
right. And um, defy the stereotype. And people love to say that the civil rights movement was nonviolent. It was not nonviolent. Black people simply suffered the violence,
Hmm.
right? There was nothing nonviolent about the civil rights movement, right? So stop saying that. No, Black people did not try to kill white ones, right? We let the world see white people try to destroy us.
What
That,
about the marching and the Salem March being clubbed
well,
and
of course, yes, and that went
yeah,
on all over the country. People were in prison. They were tortured in prison. They were,
Birmingham, Alabama with dogs?
I mean, it was on and on and on. There was nothing nonviolent about it. But we can't express rage or function from rage based on that, except in an impotent way, a self-destructive way.
Mm.
That is allowed. Even masterpieces, even Beloved, she kills her own child. She
Mhm.
doesn't go out and kill somebody else's, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that, and I don't write characters that internalize that anger. They express it, right? And they take it out on the natural, um, on the people they consider responsible,
And through substances too.
and through action, right?
Yes.
So, and it's not self-destructive action in the immediate sense. So I think that is something that's very difficult for some audiences to accept, right?
Yeah, that it's a deep topic because there's a very big lack of understanding of, that kind of everybody go in your box. Everybody get
Or,
in your
right. Mhm.
no matter how you look at it, it is that and you can't because there's no such thing as coloring in within the lines. That does not exist. The world does not exist without gray area, without that is where the arts play such a huge role of opening eyes, opening hearts at times, in understanding we have to meet in the gray area.
Mhm. And I
That's
don't,
the arts.
I I don't have a lofty ideal of what the arts can accomplish, and that may just be cynicism on my part.
Mhm.
Um, but you know, I do know that I do know that there are certain things that should be expressed and that I should have the right to express,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Oh,
And
yes.
that I, as a black person, I mean, I was born in the Jim Crow South, right? My parents
Right.
lived most of their lives in it. So this
Mhm.
is not ancient history. This is not,
Mm-mm.
um, and like I said, most of the books I'm writing are historical in one way, shape, or form. So, this is stuff that's very much of the present to me. The fact that some of the population can put it out of their minds does not erase it, right? The fact that some of the
Yeah.
population would prefer to put it out of their minds does not erase it. Um,
Just move forward.
well, that's
Yeah,
when
that's that
when
ideal.
your self-image. There are two groups of people who have consistently faced, at times, genocidal violence in this country.
Mhm.
They are Native Americans and Afro Americans, the American born children of African slaves, right?
Mhm.
There's a reason for that. Those
Mhm.
are the two groups who put the lie to so much of America's vision of itself, right? America was founded by committing genocide against Native Americans, and it prospered by enslaving Black people. When
Mhm.
you talk about yourself as the home of the free, the land of freedom and opportunity, all men are created equal. No, there are two groups of people whose very faces say that's a lie.
Mhm.
That's not all the truth. There's another truth there. People don't want to necessarily see that truth because I think that vision of America is so important to them. White Americans gave up their original ethnicities to become Americans, to become white Americans, right? They gave up being
Freedom of
Polish and
religion.
Irish and Lithuanian and everything else. Those were put aside and they became white Americans, right?
Mm.
Um,
I will
and
say the Irish did go through real hell, though.
oh,
Some of
they
them,
did.
the
And
Irish,
that
out of any white people coming here, the Irish
absolutely.
went through hell. They
There's
were
a
they
book
were close
there's
to
a
being
book called How
slaves
the
there.
Irish Became White.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with
Oh,
that? How
oh
the
my
Irish
gosh,
Became White?
that's funny. Even that
It's
that
it's
title cracks
and
me
it's
up.
fascinating because
Hmm.
they talk about that. They talk about the treatment of the Irish and how the Irish
Horrible.
turned that around. And part of that, what part of becoming white was declaring their contempt for Black people
Oh,
by becoming part of the enforcement
oh, I
of
didn't
white
know that part.
supremacy.
Oh,
Yes,
I did not know that.
yeah. And it's
Oh,
it's just a fascinating story. And the all of those nuances of color, creed, and race, and being from New Orleans and being from, New Orleans Creole stock and all of that, you get the colorism even within the Black community, right? Whereas light-skinned is better than dark-skinned and all of that, which is just a scourge
don't
and
mess with
has
a
been a
Creole
scourge.
woman. She'll
Uh,
whack you.
Really. Yes, that's true. But there is so much nuance there. There is so much complexity. And I think it's it's painful complexity, right? And I think it's something that a lot of Americans would prefer never to have to deal with again. And that's why I think you get the extraordinary resentment. That's why I think you get the attempts at essentially cultural genocide that you're seeing in Florida right now, where
Mm.
you can't teach African American history. You can't, and frankly, I think it's outrageous that Black Americans expect white dominated schools to teach us our history. I believe I believe in the Jewish model in that, and that you teach your history, right?
Mm.
You do not rely on systems of oppression to teach you your history. But
Yeah.
um, the the attempts to literally erase Black history, right? That is, I believe that's an act of cultural genocide or attempts toward it. And again, I think it's something to help the majority preserve its sense of its own purity.
Yeah.
Right.
Careful, your book may get banned. All of them. Well, isn't that all? I feel like it, every time, the banned book, I feel like burning my bra every time I see the book thing come up, the banned books week. I'm like, burn the bras, burn the bras. I, I just do. But, but it is, it's insane, is what it is. It is insane. And in, I think there is this whole thing where everybody just shut up and move forward. Even immigrants coming here, white
Mhm.
immigrants coming here, shut up, move forward, survive, survive, because they didn't have it that easy either. But
Yeah,
they
yeah,
chose to come here.
and
But they chose to come here. But I think there was this shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up thing. And at the same time, there's guilt. But then I think there's a whole bunch of people don't even feel the guilt.
well, I don't think you should. I mean, again,
Like
if
I
you
didn't do
haven't done
anything.
anything, you don't
I
feel
didn't do
guilty.
anything. Yeah.
But
So, but
am I
empathy.
I'm African American. Am I and my ancestors were brought here as slaves. Am I just as culpable to American genocide of Native Americans as any white person? Yes. Um, am I just as able to take pride in the glorious words of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, which its own drafters were not able to live up to, did not have the moral standing to live up to? Yes. Am I willing to take pride? You I can take pride in, the U.S. actions in World War II, and I can take shame in the U.S. actions over here. When
Mhm.
you adopt a country, you adopt its glories and you adopt its crimes.
Yeah.
No one is exempt. If you take the label of Americans, you accept the glories therein and you take culpability for the crimes. And part of
Mhm.
taking responsibility for those crimes is
Yeah.
looking at them and
Mhm.
ensuring that they never occur again. But if you refuse to look,
Yes.
what you're saying is that you did not commit a crime. What you're saying is that those people who you attacked deserved to be attacked.
Well, this is, to me, like when we all the statues were coming down,
Mhm.
okay? I understand that. However, what I thought would be better is to put up a big plaque saying exactly why they were being taken down. Why was this person so bad?
Mm.
Or even put it in a hall of horrors so that all the statues are there or something. So this whole moving, and I think all sides are doing it, this moving of history, Uncle Tom's Cabin, taking that away and changing it, it should be what it was. So
Yeah.
you can learn from all
Mhm.
sides.
And
I hate this. eh, People are playing God with
uh,
history, and
there
that shouldn't happen.
it's funny because it's holiday time, and I tried when you there were these grotesquely racist aspects of old Warner cartoons.
Hmm.
Old Warner
Oh
cartoons
yeah,
are
yeah,
very often
terrible.
brilliant. Well, they're very
Yeah,
often brilliant. They are just
yeah.
extraordinary, hilarious, just outrageously inventive. And then you'll get this thing that's grotesquely racist, that just drips of contempt and hate. You'll watch a movie like White Christmas, and then you're just going along with Bing and all the rest, or whoever it was. And then there's the blackface scene, right?
Oh, see,
So for white people, it's just, oh, it's a blackface scene. For me, it's
no.
these are people who are expressing contempt for me,
Hmm. So
right?
do you erase it or do you leave it?
I I leave it. I, as a black person, leave it and don't watch the movie,
Hmm.
right? Simply because to my mind, it's been tainted by
Right.
that. And for me to purposefully watch something that contains an expression of contempt for me, that would
Sure.
be insane.
But to push the delete button, you can edit it out. There's editing, I get it,
Uh-huh.
but I feel like it should be
No, I
there
think
to
the movie
show
is
that
the
this is
movie.
wrong.
That's
Yeah,
what
it's
happened.
part
That
of
is
the
that.
history. This is what we did, and if we erase, there should
Mhm,
be don't do it again. This was horrible,
mhm.
but it shouldn't, like, if we delete everything, then
It's
it didn't happen, and
and
then
I
people
think
will
that has
just
to,
do it again.
and no, I don't think you remove it to pretend it didn't happen. That of
Yeah,
course never happens, but you have to make your personal decision as to whether or not you're going to expose yourself to that, right?
yeah, yeah.
Particularly if you're the person who's being affected. I mean, there are books
Hmm.
I have read that were written in the 20s and 30s uh, that laughingly discuss someone raping someone, right?
Hmm.
For a woman to read that, right? I mean, it's
Hmm.
grotesque for a woman to read that, to actually say, I'm going to read that. I can easily say, no, I'm not going to expose myself to an expression of contempt for me, right? Once
Hmm.
again. But should that be removed from the book? No, right? You've got to acknowledge that that's there. And that's the whole part of the process is acknowledging that that's there and acknowledging that it was there.
We do repeat for sure as human
Mhm.
beings. That's what we do. But
And
that's where I think reading books, listening to music gets us into some understanding. And it's putting us, like we're talking about the cinematic side of your books, puts us
mhm,
into these scenes and you meet characters and you're on your own reading. This is your personal experience
yeah. Mhm,
and you can deal with it on a personal level, which I think is important. And then later can discuss with friends or whatever, like in a book
uh-huh.
club. Your book should be in a book club. That would be really, I would want to sit and listen to that. That, to everyone's communication on it, but to me, it's such a private thing that you can start to make decisions and have those conversations with yourself of beliefs and old
Mhm.
beliefs. People are brainwashed at times growing up, right? And have
Yeah.
to deprogram, and everybody's at a different place of fixing. The thing is, things need to be fixed. They need to not be washed under the rug, ignored like they didn't happen. It
Mhm.
needs to be acknowledged in so many different ways and move forward of doing the right things, the humane things. I I mean, I went to school where only English speaking kids went to this school, and then public schools.
Mhm.
Blacks went to their own school. The Afrikaners went to their own school. They were almost like just separating all of us out.
Mhm.
Now, if you were rich and you were in a private school, didn't matter because now you all got money. You can all go to school together,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Because now we're all genteel and
Uh-huh.
we got the la di da uniforms and
Right.
everything. So, now I look at how my friends' kids, they have parties at their houses and everyone's there, all
Mhm.
colors, all languages, everybody. It wasn't like that when I was growing up. If you're gay, oh, you better run for the bushes. Half of my
Yeah.
friends were gay, but could not even whisper about it.
Mhm.
So we've changed. It's step by step. Unfortunately, I always think it's never fast enough,
Yeah, and it's often two steps forward, one step back.
or 10.
Or 10 steps back. And there are I think now we're reaching a point of we I think we're at a point now where we have a media that feeds us our worst instincts, that gives us everything we need to do to be the worst person we can possibly be.
Mm,
Um, it's an algorithmic social media ecosystem that is designed to keep us enraged, right? Outraged and angry because
mm,
that generates clicks, right?
mm,
And then you can feed yourself more outrage and more anger. And people like feeling something, so they'll take outrage and anger, or they have a certain level of outrage and anger because we have a system that is unjust in general. But this teaches them to focus that anger in the wrong place. right? Or helps them do that such that the people who are actually invoking these injustices get away scot-free. So I think
So are people thinking
I think we're
as
at a
they
worse
do all this?
I think we're at a worse time now than we've been in a long time, because I don't think we've had these systems before, these self-generating systems of ignorance and outrage,
Yeah, I
right?
don't think there's real thought. I think there's a lot of headline drama.
Yeah,
And
and the media has certainly succumbed to the click-worthy
mm,
aspect of everything. They have sort of absolved themselves of the duty to tell the truth and have instead taken the duty to tell both sides. You know, in other words, if it were 1901, some say that Black people are subhuman. Some say they're fully human. You decide, would be the attitude of today's New York Times, right? So, I think we're at a very, very dangerous point, because I don't believe we've had media ecosystems before that were designed to bring out the worst in us,
and now we have AI.
uh, which is designed on things designed to bring out the worst in us, which is trained on
Um,
things designed to bring out the worst in us. So again, it's
yeah.
all self-generating, right?
So that's
Um,
why the arts are so important, I believe, because it gets people to think, read, have an experience without being told. Because your books, you don't tell someone how to read, and you're not you're a
Certainly,
storyteller,
yeah.
but
I'm not telling
you're
anybody how to think or how to read or how
yeah,
anything. I'm
they're
putting an
taking it the
experience
way they
before
want.
you.
It's
Yeah.
co-creative, which is really a powerful way of connecting and for
So,
people to think, which is good,
and
which is
sometimes
good.
you hope, like, for instance, people got into vinyl because of the sound. The
Mm-hmm.
the digital sound of early CDs was very poor, and
Mm-hmm.
and the digital sound of current CDs can be poor if you have a bad system, and but people went back to vinyl for that sense of warmth,
Warmth. Yep.
right, that you got from it. And I'm hoping, you can the hopium, you can always hope that people go back to more original forms of art, simply because they're more engaging, they're more interesting, they're
It's tactile.
surprising. They're
It's
surprising.
tactile. It's tactile. A book,
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
know? Oh,
And
Leon, it has been a joy having you on the show, and we could talk for hours.
thank you so much. It's been great fun.
No, it really has. And everyone, I will give everyone the website again, Leonce Gaiter, and it's Gaiter, not Gator. He's not an alligator, but it's Leonce. It's Leonce. The link is in the episode notes. Everyone go get his book. It is A Memory of Fictions, or just Tiddy-Boom. I hope you do go get it. It's going to be a good romp in that you'll get the texture I'm talking about. The characters will move you, make you think, make you have all kinds of emotions, I believe, but it's going to be your own co-creative experience, right? And I really appreciate your writing, your craft, and your diligence in creating these novels that take so much blood, sweat, and tears, and your thought behind everything. I think that's so I can tell that you're a person who critically thinks, and as we were saying today, we're lacking in a little bit of that in this world. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us, and
thank you.
here's to next year being better, right?
Okay, absolutely.
Thank you.
You take care.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.